Chapter 28. One smashed into the cuckoo's nest. The Turbo Toilet 2000 followed George and Harold back to the sanitarium. He marched toward the front doors and headed toward the restricted area. The nurses screamed and ran for safety. Snip, snap, snap. Quickly, George grabbed the intercom, turned up the volume, and started snapping his fingers into the microphone. The sounds of finger snapping echoed through the hallway of the Piqua Valley home for the reality challenged as the Turbo Toilet 2000 crashed from room to room. Mr. Krupp, who had been comatose for nearly 2 weeks, suddenly began to change. First, a mischievous twinkle gleamed in his eyes. Then a giant smile spread across his face. Suddenly, he ripped off his straitjacket, threw off his pajamas, and grabbed a curtain from a nearby window. Captain Underpants was back, and the battle of the century was about to begin. Chapter 29, the incredibly graphic violence chapter, part 2, in Flip-O-Rama. Hello, it's nice to beat you. Spank you very much. All swell that ends swell. Chapter 30, Tears of a Commode. Let that be a lesson to ye, said Captain Underpants gallantly as the Turbo Toilet 2000 cried and cried. Well, said George, I'm glad that's over with. Yeah, said Harold, that'd end up being a lot easier than I thought it would be. At that precise moment, a single teardrop from the quivering eyeballs of the Turbo Toilet 2000 flew through the air and landed on Captain Underpants' face. Splash! Suddenly, our hero's expression began to change. The sparkle disappeared from his eyes, his posture deflated, and his goofy grin morphed into a scowling grimace. What the heck is going on here? Mr. Krupp yelled. Uh-oh, said Harold. Mr. Krupp turned and saw the ginormous Turbo Toilet 2000 blubbering behind him. Ah! The frightened principal shrieked. It's a monster! And he ran away, screaming his head off. The Turbo Toilet 2000 wasn't sure what was going on, but he decided to chase Mr. Krupp and see what happened. Soon, the Leviathan lavatory cornered Mr. Krupp and scooped him up in his mighty robotic fist. I give up, cried Mr. Krupp. I surrender. Please don't hurt me. Gee, said the Turbo Toilet 2000, that ended up being a lot easier than I thought it would be. Now I just need to find those 2 annoying kids. Mr. Krupp perked a little. What 2 annoying kids? He asked. Well, said the Turbo Toilet 2000, one of them had a flat top and a tie, and the other one wore a t-shirt and a bad haircut. Hey, I know those kids, said Mr. Krupp excitedly. I even know where they live. Really? Said the Turbo Toilet 2000. Then what are we waiting for? Come on, my 2 toilet minions. Behold, my tyrannical retaliation is at hand. Mr. Krupp pointed the way, and the Turbo Toilet 2000 marched off toward George and Harold's houses. Uh-oh, said George. We're doomed again, said Harold. Chapter 31, The Retaliation. The Turbo Toilet 2000 marched to George's and Harold's houses, smashing through buildings, pushing over cars, and leaving a smoldering path of destruction behind him. George and Harold tried to keep up, but the Turbo Toilet 2000 left them trailing behind. Oh no, cried Harold, he's heading for our houses, and there's no way to warn ourselves. It didn't matter, however, because yesterday George and yesterday Harold could hear the Turbo Toilet 2000 coming from miles away. I think he's heading straight for us, cried yesterday George. But how would he know where to find us? Asked yesterday Harold. Turn left at Vine Street, said Mr. Krupp. The kids live on this block. I bet they're hiding up in that tree house of theirs. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold saw the Turbo Toilet 2000 heading for their backyard. They could feel the earth shake under each stomp of his massive metal feet. Yesterday George locked the door to the tree house. Yesterday Harold hid under the desk. Okay, said Mr. Krupp, I've led you to those 2 kids you were looking for. Can I go now? Sure, said the Turbo Toilet 2000. You can go right in here! He shoved the screaming principal into his mouth and flushed his little handle. Mr. Krupp shrieked in terror as he spun around a swirling whirlpool of saliva. Then the Turbo Toilet 2000 swallowed hard, and Mr. Krupp was flushed away with a gurgling glug glug glug. The Turbo Toilet 2000 slammed against his tree with his massive metallic shoulder. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold went flying. The bookshelf fell over, comics drew everywhere, and Cracker's eggs wobbled around precariously on the desktop. Get down here, you meddling kids, screamed the Turbo Toilet 2000 as he smashed into the tree once more. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold went flying again. The 3 eggs teetered perilously back and forth at the edge of the table. I'm warning you, cried the Turbo Toilet 2000. Give up now and I won't make you suffer. He plowed into the tree a 3rd time. This time the window smashed, the TV toppled over, and Cracker's eggs flew off the table. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold leaped for the eggs. No! cried yesterday Harold, as 3 purple and orange speckled eggs flew through the air. They hit the floor and shattered with a terrible crash. Chapter 32. Surprise, surprise, surprise! As the tree house swayed violently from side to side, yesterday George and yesterday Harold sifted frantically through the broken eggshell fragments. Suddenly, yesterday Harold's hand felt something warm and fuzzy. Carefully, he pulled it out of the broken eggshell pieces. It was, yesterday Harold wasn't quite sure what it was. What the heck is this thing? Cried yesterday Harold as a tiny fuzzy creature wrapped its wings around him and looked up lovingly into his eyes. Yesterday George pulled 2 more fuzzy winged creatures out of the shell fragments and stared at them in disbelief. This can't be, he cried. The treehouse shook wildly, and yesterday George and yesterday Harold went flying again. The 3 tiny creatures happily wiggled their way up to the boys' faces and started licking their cheeks. The Turbo Toilet 2000 climbed up the side of the tree and tore the door off its hinges. He reached in and grabbed yesterday George and yesterday Harold in his mighty metallic hand. I've got you now, roared the preposterous porcelain predator as he shook the 2 boys back and forth. The 3 fuzzy creatures fell to the floor. Quickly, they got to their feet and excitedly flapped their wings. They weren't sure what was happening, but it seemed like fun. The Turbo Toilet 2000 jumped down from the treehouse and squeezed the 2 boys tightly in his fist. Finally, I shall avenge my fallen allies and take my place as the supreme leader of the earth, he shouted. The 3 tiny creatures fluttered down to yesterday George and yesterday Harold, waggling their little tails with excitement. But when they saw the looks of terror on the boys' faces, they realized that this was not a game. Quickly, the 3 creatures took action and began circling the Turbo Toilet 2000 like mosquitoes. Then they each took turns zooming in close and taking quick bites out of them with their bionic jaws. Ouch! cried the Turbo Toilet 2000 as he desperately swatted at the swooping creatures. What the heck are those things? Another one dived in, bit him on the forearm, and yanked out a steel bolt. Hey, cut that out! Screamed the frustrated fiend as he released the boys and began swatting at the flying beasties with all his might. The strange furry creatures grasped the Turbo Toilet 2000 by his lid and shoulders and lifted him off the ground, flapping their wings as hard as they could. They carried the villainous lavatory higher and higher into the air. It's my potty and I'll fly if I want to. Soon they were more than half a mile up in the sky. Let me go, roared the terrified Turbo Toilet 2000. This turned out to be a poor choice of words because the 3 fuzzy creatures did exactly that. All at once they released their grip on the evil robotic behemoth and sent him tumbling downward. Faster and faster he fell through the clouds, spinning out of control and screaming in terror. Chapter 33. To make a long story short, kablamo! Chapter 34. Welcome back, Mr. Krupp. The Turbo Toilet 2000 had smashed into a vacant parking lot and exploded with a sonic boom that shattered nearly every window in the city. When the smoke finally cleared, Mr. Krupp sat alone in the center of the impact point, surrounded by mangled metal and jagged chunks of porcelain. Everything around had been destroyed, but Mr. Krupp, surprisingly, was unharmed. His superpowers had protected him. Soon 2 cops arrived at the scene. "Are you okay?" they asked. "I guess so," said Mr. Krupp. "This must be one of those crazy nightmares I keep having." "Oh, great," said Officer McWiggly. "It looks like we got another naked school teacher who thinks he's dreaming." "Let's lock him up with the others," said the chief of police. Chapter 35. Hamster Dactyls. George and Harold finally made it home just as 3 furry creatures were returning into the treehouse. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold told them what had happened and how the strange fuzzy creatures inside Cracker's eggs had saved the Earth from total destruction. "What are these things anyway?" said George. "They look like a cross between a hamster and a pterodactyl," said Harold. "Ew," said George. "That means Sulu and Crackers were ew." "But that doesn't make sense," said Harold. "How could a mammal mate with a reptile?" "Ew!" cried George again. I mean, unless Sulu's DNA was mutated when he morphed with that bionic endoskeleton, said Harold. "Ew!" cried George again. "I suppose a mammal with mutated genes might be able to breed with a prehistoric reptile," Harold speculated. "What part of ew don't you understand?" shouted George. "Sorry," said Harold. Soon the 4 friends and their 3 new pets were back up in their tree houses. They all worked together to clean up the mess. Then the 2 Harolds made beds for the baby hamster dactyls out of shoe boxes, while the Georges thought up names for them. "Let's call the girl Dawn," said George. "What about the 2 boys?" asked yesterday Harold. "Orlando and Tony," said yesterday George. Harold wrote their new pets' names on their shoebox beds, but he still seemed perplexed. "Are you still trying to figure out how we ended up with 3 half-pterodactyl, half-bionic hamster pets?" asked George. "Yeah, sort of," Harold replied. "You're thinking too much," said George. "Listen, if you look too closely at these stories, they're gonna fall apart completely. What do you think this is, Shakespeare?" "I guess you're right," said Harold. "Of course I'm right," said George. "Just go with it, man." Chapter 36. All's Well That Ends Poorly. "Well, that was a satisfying ending," said yesterday Harold as he tucked Tony, Orlando, and Dawn into their beds. "What do you mean satisfying?" said George. "The city is destroyed, our teachers are in jail, and there are 4 of us. And our 3 mutant pets think we're their moms." "Oh yeah," said yesterday Harold. "I guess there are a lot of loose ends in this story." "Uh-oh," said Harold. "That can only mean one thing." "What?" asked yesterday George. "Another sequel," said Harold. "Oh no," whined George and yesterday George. "Here we go again," moaned Harold and yesterday Harold. Coming soon, Captain Underpants and the Sensational Saga of Sir Stinks-a-Lot.